Hello everybody and welcome to another pronunciation video. Today we want to have a look at the ed endings of regular verbs or adjectives so that you know exactly how to pronounce them. Today we want to have a look at the pronunciation of ed endings. Now we have regular verbs ending in ed in English in the past simple and past participle form, for example, walked or played. But we also have some adjectives ending in ed, for example, fascinated or bored. So the question is, how do we pronounce ed endings? Now, there are actually three different ways we can pronounce ed endings. The first option is t. T is an unvoiced consonant in English. Unvoiced means that we do not use our vocal cords, and you can test this by putting your hand very lightly to your throat. And if you do that and say t, there is no vibration here because this is where your vocal cords are located and they are not vibrating when producing the sound t. The second option is d. D is a voiced consonant. Now you can do the check again. D, very clear vibration here from the vocal cords. This is a voiced consonant. And the third option is id. Id is a combination between a short vowel sound, I, and the voiced consonant, d. And together they form id. So here's a little summary again. So we have t, unvoiced consonant, d, the voiced consonant, and id, the combination between vowel and voiced consonant. And the third option is the only one where the letter E is actually represented through a vowel sound. You can see that in option 1 and 2, the spelling ED is only represented by one sound, and that sound is a consonant. Now you might ask yourself, when do we say what? Is there a rule or is this random? There is a rule, and we want to find out what the rule is today. So let's have a look at some regular verbs for that. Here is a box of regular verbs. I will read them out. I want you to listen carefully and pay attention to the pronunciation of ed endings. Let's start. Walked, played, wanted, used, called, needed, watched, helped, started. Now hopefully you have noticed that there is not the same pronunciation in all of these verbs. We have different pronunciations, and in fact all three are presented in these verbs. So first of all, I want us to identify the verbs that end in t, so where ed spelling is represented through t, our unvoiced consonant. And you could even use the hand method and also see if you can hear and feel the right verbs. So I will read them all out. Listen carefully. Walked, played, wanted, used, called, needed, watched, helped, started. Were you able to hear which ones have a t ending? Now the right answers are walked, watched, helped. So I repeat again. Walked, kt, watched, cht, and helped, pt. And I focused on the last two sounds for a reason, because we want to find out, well, why is ed pronounced as t here? Now for that we need to have a look at the infinitive forms of these verbs. So we have walked, the infinitive form is walk, and k is the last sound in this verb in infinitive form, and k is an unvoiced consonant as well. Now watched, the infinitive form is watch, and ch is the last sound, ch, also unvoiced. And last, helped, the infinitive form is help, and the last sound here is a p, p, is also an unvoiced sound. So all of those verbs end in unvoiced consonants in their infinitive form. And so because our vocal cords are already off, they're not working, they're not vibrating, when we add the next sound t, we just keep our vocal cords off and we just pronounce a t sound instead. And our body does this automatically. You do not need to tell your body, don't vibrate. Vocal cords are off, they stay off. It's much easier this way. Starting with the vocal cords, that's always a bit of effort. So if they're not vibrating, we keep them off. Now, one thing to remember though is that the E letter is not represented. A very common mistake is to say walked, watched, helped, and this is not correct. The letter E is not represented by a sound, and instead we have two consonants, sometimes even three if the verb ends with two consonants in infinitive form, and that can be a little bit unusual movement for your tongue, so we get to practice later. Let's have a look at the verbs ending in d. Now obviously some of those are already out because they end in t, so let's have a look at the rest of them. I'll say them out loud and I want you to listen very carefully which of these verbs end in a simple d, not id, d only. Played, wanted, used, called, needed, started. I hope you were able to hear them. The correct answer is played, used, called. And again, let's have a look why this is a d. It might have again something to do with the infinitive form. So here we have played, the infinitive form is play, and that is an A sound, a diphthong. This is a vowel sound, and we know all vowel sounds are voiced. In used, the infinitive is use, and z is a voiced consonant. And again, you can always do the test. A, z, very clear vibration. Those are voiced sounds. And then in called, the last sound for call is l. Again, very clear vibration, a voiced consonant. So all of those verbs end in a voiced sound in their infinitive form, and that means your vocal cords are vibrating, so we keep them on, and therefore the sound we say is d, because d is also voiced. But again, we do not represent the letter E through a sound, so it is not play it, use it, call it. That would actually add another syllable, but that's not the case. It's simply d, so played, used, called. Those actually are only words with one syllable. Now let's have a look at the last three verbs, and obviously it's not very difficult that here the ending is id. So here we actually have a representation for the letter E. It is represented through a vowel sound id. So just listen again. Wanted, needed, started. And the id forms its own syllable, so we add another syllable here to the infinitive forms. Now you probably think, okay, Why is it id here? It would make so much more sense anyway because of the spelling. And why are these now pronounced with id at the end? Now again, the answer lies in the infinitive form. Let's have a look. So wanted, the infinitive is want. And the end sound is already t. So you can imagine it's very difficult to add another t to a t. Even in English, we do not do that. Needed, the infinitive is need, and need ends already in d. And the same is true for started here. Start, the infinitive form ends in a t sound. So can we add another t or d here to the infinitive form straight away? No, we cannot say wanted or needed, start. No, that's not possible. There would be no difference between the infinitive form and the past simple, past participle form. And so here we have to add a vowel sound to show the difference. So the letter E is represented through the short vowel sound I, and what we get is wanted, needed, started. But of course there is a difference between all the other verbs. Now, I want you to be aware that this is a large group of verbs. Okay, so you've got a little summary here again. Ed here is id, and this is a large group of verbs. So it's not just an exception for a handful of verbs. This is a large group of verbs, and also the other groups for t and d are big groups. So in fact, all of the regular verbs can be put into these three groups. So let's practice the pronunciation of these three groups, because it's very important that you become more familiar and more comfortable saying so many consonant sounds one after the other, because in some languages that is new, and therefore your tongue is not used to the movement. So let's practice. So first of all, we are going to practice the pronunciation of verbs where ed is pronounced as t. So there are lots of consonant sounds next to one another. So listen and then repeat. Looked, looked. Asked, asked. So here you have s, k, t, three consonants next to one another. Asked, talked, talked. Liked, liked. Stopped, stopped. Past, past. Hoped, hoped. Developed, developed. Walked, walked. Watched, watched. Helped, helped. Thanked, thanked. Dropped, dropped. Pushed, pushed. Placed, placed. Very good. I can't hear you, but I'm sure you're doing very well. Excellent practice. I know this is a little bit tricky because of all the consonants next to one another. So if you feel like you need more practice, you can just go back and watch that part again and practice again. And these are all very common regular verbs. These are not the only verbs where ed is pronounced as t, but these are very common ones. Now, the next group are verbs where ed is pronounced with d, the voiced consonant d. Sounds a lot softer than t, which is a bit harder. So listen and repeat. Used, used. Called, called. Continued, continued. Seemed, seemed. Turned, turned. Played, played. You're doing very good. Keep going. Moved, moved. Lived, lived. Believed, believed. Tried, tried. Changed, changed. Stayed, stayed. Opened, opened. Happened, happened. Explained, explained. Very good, fantastic. Again, I feel these are a little bit easier maybe. Sometimes in the other group you have really 3 consonants next to one another. These ones are usually a little bit easier to say. Hopefully you found that too. Now, our third group is the group of verbs where ed is pronounced as id, because all of them end in t or d in their infinitive form. So let's practice those too. Wanted, wanted. Needed, needed. Started, started. Included, included. Waited, waited. Created, created. Expected, expected. Decided, decided. Suggested, suggested. Supported, supported. Noted, noted. Protected, protected. Accepted, accepted. Represented, represented. Very good. Excellent pronunciation practice. Now you need to give yourself a little rest because sometimes that can be quite exhausting. But last but not least, there is a little test for you now to see if you can hear the difference between id, t, and d. So make sure you do the test and leave a little comment afterwards and let me know how you did. Now it's time to test yourself. How do you pronounce these verbs? Listen and check. Arrived, visited, talked. And here are the answers. Arrived, ed is pronounced with d, arrived. Visited, ed is pronounced as id, visited. Talked, t, ed is pronounced as t. Test number 2. How do you pronounce these adjectives? Listen and check. Frustrated, stressed, amazed. And here are the answers. Frustrated, ed is pronounced as id. Frustrated. Stressed. Ed is pronounced with t. Stressed. Amazed. Ed is pronounced d. Amazed. Well done, everybody.